Welcome to the Extraordinary Podcast, where we identify God's uncommon work in common life. Recognizing God's work requires intentionality, but articulating it motivates and inspires. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. In today's episode, I have a conversation with David Watterson about the service in the church, but also about the heart of what it means to serve Jesus and what that can produce. So let's get into the conversation with David. David, thank you for being on the podcast today. We appreciate you taking the time to share your story and God's grace in your life. So thank you for being here today. As we begin, could you share a little bit about your life growing up, your upbringing, family, those types of things?
Well, I was born in Burlington. I had wonderful, godly parents that took us to church every Sunday, and I have a sister that is a year younger than I. I call her my favorite sister, and Beth is not feeling real well right now, but I've always appreciated all your prayers for her, and we continue to pray for her health. And I have a wonderful younger brother that's 7 years younger than I. We grew up in two different homes. In my grade school years, I had to walk 2 whole blocks to elementary school, and I have always told the grandkids it was uphill both ways.
Mm-hmm. In the snow.
In the snow, yeah. And without the snow, actually. But when we went to junior high, that got quadrupled because we had to go clear to the other end of town, and then high school was way downtown, so we did end up paying that price. Fast forward, well, Mom and Dad worked. Mom worked several different jobs once we got older, but my father was a finished carpenter and did a lot of work out here in the process of his church life. Then in 75, I married Christy, and we had 2 kids, Mark and Marla. Mark and Marla are both very church. Mark is following in his grandfather's and in his father's steps, and we're very proud of him and all the things that he does. Marla had cystic fibrosis when she was born, and don't remember the years, how far back, but she got a double lung transplant, and God has blessed her with good health and a good family. So there we have 4 grandchildren, and then fast forwarding to almost 26 years ago, Karen and I blended our families, and she has 2 boys, a Dr. Brian out in Spokane, Washington, and then Matthew in Illinois. And we're blessed with good kids. We're really very fortunate.
Can you share a little bit about your your work history, and what you did, your responsibilities?
My first full-time job was at JAI Case for almost 41 years. And of that time, some of it was spent on a side of assembly for crawlers, and then I went into repair for probably close to 30 years of that time. So I got to see how the tractor was built, the backhoe was built. We are the backhoe capital of the world here in Burlington, Iowa. I'm very proud of that. And I had known Perry from church, and plus we worked together. He was our favorite expediter. We got to build a lot of friendships at Case. When somebody sees you, they go, "You're from Case. Hey, do you know?" And you go, "Well, there's a lot more than where I work." But anyway, we're always bumping into somebody that worked at Case. But I have some interesting stories about Case as it ties to church. One of the things, and Becky will very well remember Mike Palmer as our pastor, we were getting ready for a revival. And when I started Case, even though I had always been churched, I kind of led a double life. I wasn't always true to the Lord. And as time went on, I started seeing little tools that I needed, and I'd stick them in my pocket and take them home. And going back to Pastor Palmer, we were getting ready for a revival. I remember very clearly. Can't tell you who it was. Becky probably remember. But I met with Pastor. I had been convicted of some of the things that I'd been doing, and during the hour right before revival service, I put it all on the table, and I told him where I was spiritually, and he prayed with me, and we got things squared away between me and the Lord. And it hasn't always been that way since that day, but that was a big turnaround time for me. And the reason I tell you about work is because that night I missed revival. That was the only night I missed, because I had to go home and make some important phone calls and some big apologies and ask forgiveness for a lot of things that I'd done. So the next day when I went to work, I happened to see the head of the company walking through, and I knew what I needed to do, and I thought, Lord, if you want me to do this, you got to make it convenient. So I raced towards him, and he stopped, and we talked, and I confessed that I had taken some things and told him I'd make restitution, and did. He was gracious, could have fired me, and didn't. So that was God's hand at work in that. But it's interesting to see God's hand at work when we're honest and when we're upfront with him, and he's always better to me than I deserved. But that was my work and God's story. But got a lot of good friendships from there at work.
Yeah, well, that's a great story of being obedient to God, and
Yes.
things won't always work out the way we want them to, but we need to be obedient to God and let Him deal with take care of the details. So thank you for sharing that. That's a good story and good reminder for us. But as you mentioned, you've been involved in the church pretty much your whole life. Can you just briefly share some of the different responsibilities and volunteer responsibilities that you have done?
Well, I don't know how briefly I can make that, Pastor, but
Well, I say briefly because you probably can't get to them all today.
no. One of the interesting things that maybe people wouldn't know about me is my father's parents were pastors. I grew up in the Free Methodist Church, which is very similar to the Nazarene Church, but basically the same theologies, little different structure of politics, but they were pastors of that Free Methodist Church, and I had a lot of great pastors that tried to, and I say tried, to help me along and form me and walked alongside of me, taking me to church camps, kids camps. One of the big gentlemen that stands out in my life was the pastor that built Dolores Plummer's house right across the alley from the church. So we ended up coming out here in '75 after Christy and I got married. And I always, and it's not going to go well with our subject, but we had done everything in the church except preach. My father was always there. In the old days, they had running water, but they had coal stoves. So he would have to go there early and stoke up the furnace to have a warm church in the morning. So I learned by example how to do things in the church. One of my first responsibilities was teaming with my mother, who played the piano, leading, singing, the choir, the little choir that we had. And in Iowa, in the Free Methodist Church, I became the youngest Sunday school superintendent at the age, I believe, of 19. But we were always involved in church. And I kindly say the only thing that you become right away when you go to church is churched. Confucius says, do stinker in church, you must sit in own pew. But when you apply yourself, when you go for the right reason, if you truly, with your heart open and your mind open, you'll find the real reason, and that's God behind church. Church is really about God. But sometimes we find ourselves doing all these jobs out of duty. Somebody needs to do them. Well, admit to that. But you need to do it with the right heart. And I guess my biggest regret is not following the Lord close enough all those early years when I should have been growing spiritually. I can't tell you all the church messages, the revivals, the camp meetings that I heard that sometimes seemed to go over the top because I wasn't where I needed to be. But service is very important to a church, but it needs to be done with a right heart to really make you feel like you've accomplished something important.
It sounds like you are differentiating between serving the institutional or the organization as opposed to serving Jesus. And if you serve Jesus, you'll serve in the organization, but the organization isn't what we're serving.
Right.
There's the church is to be different from good organizations that just do good.
Yeah.
Like which is fine. Whether you're, I don't want to mention the name because there are good organizations out there, and I don't want to be demeaning. But our service in the church should be more than just trying to accomplish something or do good. So
that's one of the interesting things about Wednesday nights with Bill Yeager. He's teaching us and encouraging us to speak to people in a way that God can be edified.
That's a really good point. So our service in part should be based on that. I mean, well, not in part, should be based in full of edifying, edifying God. So is that why you serve?
That is now. It didn't always used to be. And I can honestly tell you, sitting here, I have punished myself sometimes by finding jobs to do and think, I know God doesn't reward that way, but it was something that I needed to do to make myself feel better. There's all kinds of service in the church, and we always gain from it. Think of all the times that we've done sweet corn ministry. You can't look at it and go, God's not in this, because he is. And we always had fun, and your friendships build out of that. I mean, who can't laugh when Becky goes stumbling across the corn rows with two full buckets of corn? But those friendships are lasting. Church is a great place to find God, to grow spiritually, and to have great friendships. My very best friend, Gary Chappell, we're like brothers. And he took me on, and it's like, those are more precious friendships than all of the friendships outside of church. Perry, Jay, they're worth millions that you...
And I mean that's great. That's part of the community that God calls us to, and part of the purpose of the church that Jesus established for us. I want to touch on something you went to. You said you were the youngest Sunday school superintendent at 19. I think there's importance in making sure that the current generation provides ways for the next generation to serve, whether you're talking about those in their 20s and 30s, even teens and kids. It's important to help them see the value in serving as well as the reason for serving. Any ideas or suggestions for how we make sure we make space for the next generations for service?
I think one of the great things is just, like I mentioned about the corn ministry, if you get so many people involved, they not only see the fun in it, but they realize how much good it's doing, because that money goes to missions.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it to foreign missions and some of it to here at home missions. But I think when we work together, some of that just rubs off to where you go, oh, that's what I miss. I missed that all of my years that I worked 6 days a week. I wasn't able to help with corn ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I wonder what's going on. What did I miss? And then once I retired, I was able to get in it, and I'm thinking, ooh, you just enjoy, but you have to do it with others. And as we've seen younger ones come in and alongside to involve them. And I guess one of the things I like to tell people is, what you see somewhere else, what would you like to see here? One of the things that impressed me, and one of the reasons I do what I do on a Sunday morning, is we went to a church in an evening when we didn't have church, so it wasn't like I was going somewhere else. But they had a gentleman standing outside, and he opened the door. And I'm thinking, I can do that. It's a simple task. It doesn't take a lot of education or anything except friendliness.
Mm-hmm.
I can say hello, open the door, let them in, pat them on the back as they go by, or shake their hand, or greet them that way. And that's what I've tried to help others, some of the younger guys maybe, that you can do that and you can help encourage people. Mm-hmm. We all need to want to feel loved and encouraged. And I think by helping others do that, working alongside of like work days, sharing what little I know about different things, they can learn things that way.
I think one of the things you're speaking of is intentionally invite others to serve with you.
Yes.
It's not about accomplishing a task, and my personality is the journey is not the destination. When I'm going somewhere on a trip, it's the car ride is not the destination. It's the getting there. But when we're talking about serving the world in the name of Jesus, the journey is the destination, because we're never going to be done. It's not as though we're ever going to get to a point where, well, there's nothing left to do, because Jesus still has more for us to do. So inviting others with us. But I think part of that requires humility, to allow others to come join you, because you could do it better. There's a lot of things you could do better by yourself, or just as fine without any help. So has humility played any part in that, or can you speak to the concept of humility?
I think that's something that we find the more that we love the Lord, that comes easier. It's easier to serve other people and not be first, or have to. I would rather hide in the wings and do something that way than be out in leadership. I'm fine playing Joshua, to be there by the tent and open the door. Mm-hmm. I think Joshua was a great example to me in the Old Testament, because he stayed by that tent. He knew there was something very special about God's presence. And Moses, the man of God, going in and speaking face to face, I find that being the hunger in my life, wanting that if it takes me to open a door, but I'd like to help others have that experience of doing those things for the Lord, so that they could get there too.
Yeah, that's great. Your Joshua illustration, that's thought provoking. So thank you. I mean, people know Joshua, but Moses is the one who's on Mount Rushmore of the spiritual giants in the Old Testament. But Joshua is still important, and Joshua played a huge role. And so no matter what our role, it's important when we do it for Jesus. But there may be some who maybe they're not where they need to be spiritually, and maybe they know it. Should they stop serving?
No, not by any means. I found that to be true at church, and I think that's one of the things that I've tried to teach kids. Even if you're not really paying attention, some of that's still getting in your head. People say, well, why should I go to church? I'm not interested. Because God loves us, and we need to hear that. And sometimes we don't pay attention in church. And sometimes when I'm greeting, I'm not always catching all of it, but I catch a lot of what you say. And that helps us to grow, helps nurture us. And it's habit forming. I hear people say, well, I was drugged in church because I got drugged back and forth. Well, David Jeremiah gets credit for that. But by doing that, we're getting a habit that shows us and teaches us about God and his love for us and how we can grow and do things for him and for his kingdom, for his community.
Yeah, there's these things called spiritual disciplines and discipline means like we have to discipline ourselves to do it, have to be intentional about it. And so part of following Jesus is we've got to work at it. And that doesn't mean that we fake it, but that we've got to put the time in, and but the time's worth it. Like when we authentically give of ourselves to Jesus, we're going to realize that's a wise decision for us to make.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Mark is real good at. He says it's not about me, and I think that's one of the things I found. The longer, as I said, I tried to serve the Lord and haven't always been where I should be. But the satisfaction came when the spiritual journey followed my physical journey or led my physical journey. Mm-hmm. Because there's something about helping somebody else that makes you feel good. I don't care if it's church related or not. But when you help somebody else, there's that good feeling. And that's what Jesus taught us in the New Testament, helping others. And that builds us.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, we feel good when we help others, and I think part of that is we're fulfilling what Jesus has called us to do, whether we know it or not. Mm-hmm. Do you have any words of encouragement for your generation, because the church maybe not what it used to be, or there's a mentality of discouragement? Do you have any words of encouragement for your generation?
Well, someday we will all look back and wish that we had done differently. And I guess that's what I talk about with my regret. I wish I could have really paid attention and really honored God with my relationship with him, because I would have saved myself so much grief. I could have grown and done so much more to help other people, really, rather than kind of helping myself along. And I think if I was to encourage anybody anyway, even if you don't feel like it, get up on a Sunday morning and go to church. Because you will always gain something. You will hear something that will help you live your life better every week. And you'll have a pastor that loves you and prays for you. That is worth more than you will ever know. And to have the friendships that you will have for life. The older we get, the more we realize it's not about us. And we need to encourage each other. That's what we're really supposed to do. I think the great commandments, love one another as I have loved you. If we can do everything in love, we will feel better about ourselves. Plus we'll be doing what our Father wants us to do.
Speaking about your regrets, I love the concept, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now, or today. And spiritually speaking, we may have regrets, but the best time was 20 years ago or whenever it was. The second best time is now. And so we can't change the past, but we can make different decisions now. And And if you come to church selfishly, you're probably going to leave dissatisfied. Because Jesus in Mark chapter 10 tells us he did not come to be served, he came to serve. And he calls us to do that because that's the way of life that he knows is best for us, to serve others. And so thank you for your service and the various things you do and that you're willing to do now and the history of all you've done. You've been inspiring to me, and I am confident when I say this, that your service has positively impacted others for the kingdom. And so thank you for your service and your willingness to share for us today. Is there anything else that you had that you wanted to share?
Not that I can think of right offhand, but
I just wanted to make sure that I didn't cut you off or stop you from something that you wanted to share.
I'm grateful for my church upbringing, because if I hadn't, I might not have come to know the Lord. And by starting literally day one in church, because Mom and Dad always took us to church, by being there, I had that hunger. And I learned that information, to have the deeper desire to have Jesus as my friend and my helper the rest of my life.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Yeah, being in church doesn't necessarily make you a Christian, but Jesus is there, and there's opportunity to experience him. So I hope people, I know people will be inspired by what you said, they'll be moved. I appreciate what you said and just how you live out your faith. So thank you for who you are. Thank you for your faith, and just thank you for being a guest on our podcast today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast. Be on the lookout for how God does uncommon work in common life, and please subscribe to never miss an episode.